Week 9 of the fantasy football season, and here's quarterback start sits every matchup. This week, first matchup Thursday Night Football, Tennessee Titans at the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Will Levis last week, he started for the injured Ryan Tannehill, and he had one hell of a performance as Levis, 4 touchdowns in that game, throwing a great deep ball. Him and DeAndre Hopkins really on the same page, and this week here is definitely a tough test for Will Levis versus one of the better defenses in the league, going to Pittsburgh on Thursday Night Football. But I like the arm strength. I like the weapons. Obviously, Hopkins, Derrick Henry, you got Traylon Burks, Westbrook-Ikhine. I know those guys really haven't done much this season, but with his arm strength and with him picking it up pretty quick, it looked like the playbook. Levis, and sitting on the bench the first 7 weeks of the season, I think he could go out there at Pittsburgh and have a decent ball game. So I got him as a start. Now to the Steelers, Kenny Pickett. He's going to try to play in this game, but even if he does, he hasn't been a fantasy option all season, even though he's got good weapons. George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, and Jaylen Warren out of the backfield. But right now, Tennessee's defense has been a middle of the pack. I know these Thursday night games usually are shootouts, but Kenny Pickett, you can't trust him. And if you don't play Mitchell Trubisky, we saw him come in last week, and we know what we're going to get from Trubisky. He's going to have some decent throws, and then he's going to turn over the ball 1 or 2 times a game. So right now, both those quarterbacks, whoever starts this one on Thursday night is a sit. Now to the Dolphins at the Chiefs in Germany, 9:30 ball game here in the States. And this one's going to be a shootout. It wouldn't be surprising me if these teams combine for 50, 60 points in this one. Tua, he's a start each and every week. Top 5, top 6 quarterback. Patrick Mahomes, I know last week it was a tough one at the Denver Broncos, and he wasn't feeling great with the illness. Supposedly he had the flu, but I think he bounces back in this one. This is an indoor game, which is always going to help. And you know that crowd over there, they've been starving for some NFL football. So I think Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense gets back on track. And this is going to be a shootout, and these two are the top 5, top 6 quarterbacks in fantasy football this season. Now to the Rams at the Green Bay Packers. I don't like anyone in this game. Matthew Stafford, he might go on injured reserve, or he might play. It's just still up in the air right now what's going to happen with Stafford. But the last few weeks, he's taken a beating once again. He's taken a lot of hits. I know Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, a great 1-2 combo and one of the best duos in the league. But right now, Matthew Stafford, I can't trust. It's going to be probably cold over here in Green Bay as well, which is tough to grip the ball even if he plays with the injury on his throwing thumb. So he'll be a sit. And Brett Rypien, we know he started a handful of games on and off over the last few seasons, bouncing around the league a little bit, but he's not going to be a guy to have confidence in. I know you got Cooper Kupp and Nacua, like I mentioned, on this roster and in the lineup, but he's a sit. Jordan Love, the first 3 weeks of the season, he looked good and he looked like he could be a big fantasy contributor, but obviously that hasn't been the case here with Jordan Love. So this week versus a middle of the pack type of defense, even though I know the Dallas Cowboys last week, 36 points on offense they scored, and to get to 43, they had a pick 6 in that game. But anyway, Jordan Love, he's been inconsistent. He's missing a lot of throws, and he just looks off. And him and Christian Watson haven't been on the same page at all this season. So he's a sit in this one, tough to trust. Now to the Commanders at the New England Patriots. Sam Howell, he's come out of nowhere this season here for this Commander team. And even as a fantasy option, he's had only 2 bad games the whole season, where the other 6, he's gone out there with 18 or more fantasy points in Howell. So coming off a monster game, over 30 fantasy points last week versus the Philadelphia Eagles, throwing for 397 pass yards and 3 touchdowns. Sam Howell, he's a gunslinger I've mentioned a lot. He's a quarterback that takes big hits, but he hangs in there, and he's a guy that's a gamer for sure. So this week, I know this New England team isn't all that great, but it is a tough matchup going into Gillette Stadium and trying to play a good game offensively. Have Howell as a start. Mac Jones, he's been way too up and down, and that'll lose Kendrick Bourne for the season. There's just no one really on this offense. Smith-Schuster, I know, scored a touchdown last week. Hunter Henry, he's been up and down this season. And this week, I know they traded Montez Sweat and Chase Young off that defensive line. Surprisingly, both these pass rushers, but even with that, Mac Jones with limited amount of weapons is a sit. Tampa Bay Bucks at the Texans. Baker Mayfield, believe it or not, he's a start for me this week. Baker Mayfield's been playing good football with 4 games over 20 fantasy points this season in the league. So right now he's got good weapons. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rashad White out of the backfield, versing a young defense and secondary of the Houston Texans. And this week it's very thin at the quarterback position with a few teams on bye and also with the injuries we've seen all season. So right now I think Baker Mayfield is a quarterback that could go out there and put up serviceable numbers. He's a start. CJ Stroud's a start for me. I know last week was one of the worst games of his pro career, where it was a lot of pedestrian and just a bad loss in general to an 0-6 team in the Carolina Panthers. But CJ Stroud, he's got good weapons. Nico Collins, Tank Dell back in the lineup last week. So I think he could get those guys going in Dalton Schultz. And this could be a mini shootout. And this season, CJ Stroud, the rookie's played better at home than he's on the road. So I think this week he bounces back and is a start. Now to the Cardinals at the Browns. Not much you want to see here in this one at the quarterback position. Kyler Murray, he might play in this game. We don't know what you're going to get from Kyler Murray. This Brown defense, pretty solid unit. He will be a sit. And if you don't start, it's going to be Clayton Tune, the rookie quarterback, a guy you definitely can't start as well. Even in 2 quarterback leagues, I wouldn't trust Clayton Tune at all, even though I know with the bye week, some owners, if Tune does start, have no opportunity. But your basic formats, you're not starting any of these guys. We know they traded Joshua Dobbs away to the Vikings, so he's out of the equation. Now to the Browns, PJ Walker. He's just looked horrible the last few weeks here for this Brown team. I know he started off good last week at the Seahawks, but he can't get the ball to his wide receivers. He's been inaccurate. He's turning the football over, and he's an easy sit even versus a weak Cardinal defense. And Deshaun Watson, if he comes back in this game, I believe he won't be 100%. And to be honest, Deshaun Watson, he's only had a couple decent games over the last season and change since he's been back in the league after suspended for a majority of 2 seasons pretty much. So right now, Deshaun Watson, not 100% he's going to be. I know it's a good matchup, but I wouldn't trust him even if he comes back. He's a sit. Vikings at the Atlanta Falcons. Jaron Hall's going to get the start in this one. I know they traded for Joshua Dobbs, and I think we'll see Dobbs in either week 10 or 11 start for this Minnesota Viking team. So Jaron Hall, he definitely has good wide receivers and an offense around him over here in Minnesota. But this week here, I don't see Hall going out there and doing much. It definitely could take people by surprise like Will Levis did last week, obviously at this versus Atlanta Falcon team, but I don't see it this week. He don't have the arm strength like Will Levis. He's a 5th-round draft pick out of BYU. And if he's going to turn into something, I think it's going to take some time, so I don't see him this week as a fantasy option. Now to the Falcons, Desmond Ridder, he's been one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the league. We know he left that game in the 3rd quarter. He had a concussion and got pulled, conflicting reports on that. But either way, I wouldn't start him. And Taylor Heineke, I think, has been a better quarterback than Desmond Ridder throughout their careers here, where Heineke at least can move the football down the field. We know he's a gunslinger, turns it over a lot, but at least he's taking chances and trying to move the offense. But either way, in this matchup, I wouldn't trust Taylor Heineke as well. He's a sit. Chicago Bears at the New Orleans Saints. Tyson Beckett, he's a sit for me. Beckett, I know he's had some decent moments so far the first 2 weeks he started for the Chicago Bear team, but still not enough for me to go out there and have confidence in him. And last week, he got off to a good start versus the Chargers, and then by the 2nd quarter, he fizzled out, and that game pretty much was over. So this week, versus a pretty stout defense, especially at home versus the New Orleans Saints over there in New Orleans in the Superdome, he's not going to be a start. He's a sit. Derek Carr is a start for me. Quarterback, like I said, very weak position this week, especially with the bye weeks and a couple guys banged up. And Derek Carr, the last 3 games, he's gone over 300 yards. So with good weapons in Chris Olave, even though he hasn't played to full potential this season. Michael Thomas and Rashid Shaheed, a deep ball threat that's emerged this season. And Kamara out of the backfield being a PPR machine. Derek Carr, once again, versus one of the worst secondaries in the league, is a start. Seahawks at the Ravens, Geno Smith. It's been a tough season for him after last year, having a career year and signing a nice contract in the offseason. And this week, it's going to be a tough one at the Baltimore Ravens. And I know the Seattle Seahawks team is 5-2. They're playing good football, but this week versus a Raven defense that gets to the quarterback early and often, Geno taking a lot of sacks and hits so far this season, I just don't trust him. He'll probably crack my top 15 in the rankings, but right now, only in deeper leagues and desperation play, I would start Geno. So he's a sit. Lamar Jackson, we know he's a start each and every week. I know last week he didn't do much. It was the Gus Edwards show with 3 rushing touchdowns, but Lamar Jackson's an MVP candidate. This Raven team, they've picked it up over the last few weeks. And Jackson, he's been going back to the basics as well, getting Mark Andrews more involved. We saw Andrews the last few weeks have big games. So once again, versus a middle-of-the-pack defense in the Seahawks, he's a start. Now to the Colts at the Carolina Panthers, and Gardner Minshew, one of the better backup quarterbacks in all the NFL. And Minshew's been serviceable over the last few weeks here since he stepped in with Richardson out for the season with the shoulder injury. 2 weeks ago, in a shootout loss versus the Browns. He had over 30 fantasy points was Minshew. And last week he had 18 fantasy points versus a pretty decent New Orleans Saints defense. So this week here going to Carolina, who's 1-6 on the season, definitely struggling. I think Gardner Minshew could go in there and have a decent game once again. So I have him as a start. Bryce Young's a sit for me. Pretty much the only weapon on this offense that's been consistent this season has been Adam Thielen for this Carolina Panther team. And Bryce Young, I think he's going to get better as the weeks goes on. But this week here versus a middle-of-the-pack type of defense in the Indianapolis Colts, and them coming off of 2 tough losses, I think this defense is going to buckle down a little bit. And it's going to be tough sledding for Young. New York Giants at the Vegas Raiders. Daniel Jones, he'll be back in this game, but we haven't seen much out of Jones at all. After last season, he was a top 12 quarterback in fantasy points. And I know this Raider defense isn't all that great, but I don't see the Giants moving the football well. They did move it pretty decent with Taylor, but he went down, and they had to go to DeVito in last week's game versus the Jets, and they lost that one. So this week here, cross-country travel to Las Vegas. It usually doesn't pan out for the traveling team either way. And Daniel Jones, like I said, you can't have confidence in him. We haven't seen anything from him this year. So he's a sit. Jimmy Garoppolo was sit. He just can't hit his receivers. He missed Davante Adams on some deep balls where he was wide open easily, where they could have been big plays or even touchdowns where Jimmy Garoppolo can't connect. He's taken a lot of sacks. He's already been banged up a few times this season with the back leg injuries, and he's thrown already 8 interceptions. So right now, Jimmy Garoppolo, he's not a guy even in the deepest of leagues I would really recommend. And he's a sit for me now to Sunday Night Football, and what a matchup this is going to be versus 2 of the top teams in the AFC. Buffalo Bills at the Bengals. Josh Allen, we know, is the top of fantasy points at the quarterback position, and he's matchup proof. And I know he's had turnover problems, but each and every week he's a start. Is Allen. Joe Burrow, he's back to that each and every week start status. Is Burrow. He's healthy now. That bye week helped big time. And him and Jamar Chase, ever since Chase post-game comments where he wasn't happy not getting the football, he's the guy right now making big plays. And him and Burrow are on the same wavelength. And even T. Higgins last week, we saw have a good one. So coming off a big game and a nice victory at San Francisco, I think once again Burrow is a must-start play this week in the final game, Monday Night Football, Los Angeles Chargers at the New York Jets. So Justin Herbert, he's been pretty solid for the most part once again this season. And pretty much there's 7 quarterbacks that are top guys in fantasy football, where the rest they're pretty much in the same category, 15, 20 fantasy points. So this week, even versus a tough defense like the New York Jets going to MetLife Stadium on Monday Night Football, I got Justin Herbert as a start. He's got a lot of weapons. He's a quarterback that gets the football down the field, and he can make plays a lot of ways, so he's a start. Zach Wilson, one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the league, and a kid who really just can't find the end zone at all this season. If it wasn't for a Breece Hall screen touchdown, that was 3 games in a row without a throwing touchdown. So this week here, even versus a middle-of-the-pack type of defense like the Chargers, I got Wilson as a sit, so that's quarterback start sits every matchup for Week 9 of the fantasy football season.